Good afternoon, gentlemen, here in Dubai, also at home, at their home screen. Nice to have you here. We have the deep dive on artificial islands and sustainable blue growth. This is, next slide please, this is actually organized by the Blue Cluster, so I'm working for the Blue Cluster, and it is embedded in the G-STIC conference, which takes place here in Dubai this year, and it's also one of the events of Flanders Investment and Trade. So with the Blue Cluster, we work on innovation at sea, blue economy, and it's actually the blue economy that is becoming very important also to boost our economy in general. And today we want to talk about islands, artificial structures at sea. How can we use them to have this sustainable blue growth happening? And we have quite some interesting speakers today. We have an opening speech which will not open the session, so that's quite innovative, I would say. It's actually the Minister President that is in another meeting yet, and he will come. When he comes in, he will pop in and give his speech. So sorry for this slight rearrangement of the scheme. Then we have our keynote speech. We have chosen 3 different teams, one on nature development, nature-based solutions, one on renewable energies, and one on seafood production. And it's all experts in these fields that will try to think about what could islands mean in these blue economies, and how could they actually benefit, or can they actually boost the blue economy in some way or another. Then we will put these people together on the stage, and some are virtually present, to have a short panel discussion to see whether we can come to some conclusions, because the aim is, of course, that we move forward. We will produce some kind of small paper that will be available for you as well, to see how can we actually use these artificial structures. And then we are very, very honored also to have our closing speech by Peter Thomson. So I would say let's get started with the first speaker. Next slide. It's not Minister President, but it is Professor Alexander Doge. He is director at ORG Permanent Modernity, and he will talk about complexities and opportunities, so about mixing functions on an artificial island. Professor Doge, the floor is yours.
I don't have a clicker. Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for taking some time out in this to do a deep dive on technical and social issues here. I have a background as an academic. I built a Center for Advanced Urbanism at MIT, and I'm now helping build a company called ORG, and we've engaged with a number of large-scale, complex infrastructural questions over the last decade. The presentation I give to you will be condensed and focused on a new kind of design object, which we could call marine multifunctional landscape infrastructures. Marine multifunctional landscape infrastructures. In short, MMLIs. Thank you. So I will try to give you a background about why we are witnessing at this very moment in human history, in the history of human development, a new kind of object. We're used to this, we're used to the infrastructure solving singular problems. You see the windmills, obviously, you see land creation for real estate or for specific forms of farming. These are single solutions for singular problems. This is what we're used to. But look, I mean, in the reality of our land is that it's always multifunctional, and not just our land. These are the territorial waters of, as it happens, Belgium. And as you can tell, the uses, the marine uses in this stretch, very busy stretch of North Sea, where you have, of course, the port of Antwerp, but many other energy uses, harvesting of functions. It's a densely used area, pipelines, etc. So the reality is multifunctional, and we need to be smart about this and create this new object to be able to realize anything in this kind of a climate. Marine multifunctional landscape infrastructures can be privately built. We are convinced that it's possible to build a business model around them, but the multifunctionality is a part of the reason why it could be. And so we can have benefits, financial and social, in various different directions for various different stakeholders. Why is this important? I mean, besides the fact that it might be the right thing to do, let's say from a viewpoint of an energy transition or a blue energy transition. Why is it smart to do this? Because if you think about it, if you look at this, in the Western world at least, about 1 in 3 of the large infrastructure investments actually gets effectively realized. There's a huge loss. 2 out of 3 of our tries to realize something are losses, hugely over budget or just doesn't get built at all. Now, why is this? Because most of the time we just have missed the social and spatial risks associated. People don't like it, don't want it, object to it, protest it, don't see the benefits. And so, and this is in particular the case in the most densely populated part of Europe, Flanders. It has the highest density in people per square meters, higher than the Netherlands and higher than Israel. And as you can see, the northern part of Belgium has a stretch of coastal waters, which has been a very rich area for cultural reflection. Of course, in the Belgian pavilion, people tend to be aware of this, but is now really ready for some massive changes. We've had hundreds and hundreds of windmills realized. There's another wave coming. It's basically becoming one of the most intensively used areas. And so we need to think about how to plan in multifunctional ways for the energy transition, but also in co-creative ways, ways that engage other people and engage society at large. So, to make it simple, we built a 5-step process. First step, how to design a marine multifunctional landscape infrastructure is a pretty straightforward technical description about if you have a sandbank or you have an ecosystem underwater, a bathymetry, what are the rules by which you can create a structure that will be able to resist the test of time. This is a geometrical and a soil mechanical rule-based system. All right, so that's something we can prep for almost any location. The second thing is once you have a sort of a formation or the rules of a formation is to think about how you might be able to program this. If you have a slight slope, many things are possible beyond what you think is possible. You see you have landscape, aquaculture, so farming, marine farming, recreation, energy, obviously, and many other uses. Ecological services are a big portion. So we built a vast book, a vast catalog of potential landscape and marine landscape uses that can sometimes generate money or at least generate benefits broadly. This is an example for mussel harvesting, where you see the cycles you can do over a year, as well as the kind of infrastructure it requires and the kind of scale it requires to actually be successful. You then have questions to answer about how far do we go with mussel construction. In the broad field of things. Welcome, Minister President. And so, if you have the program book, you can start to try out on your pre-built island or your parametric island. You can fit a bunch of programs. There are rules about how to combine the programs, to combine functions. These rules it can also be expressed geometrically to a degree. And then in a fourth step, one big difference between an artificial, let's say, a marine multifunctional landscape infrastructure and a building or a conventional infrastructure, the way we all know how to build them, is that these landscapes are dynamic. They change. A sand bank changes position over time. It's not stable. So a part, of course, of this project must be stable, but the part will be dynamic. That means that over time, if you look at a 100 or a 200-year cycle, this is not a singular shape. It'll move. And so to be able to predict this movement is of key importance, and to actually plan for it. So when you do this, you make new land, you build for future generations, that you involve the way it will look for them in 50 or in 100 years, and base your choices on that. Finally, I will wrap up with this. I believe that it can be very useful and very important for us as a society to build these kind of novel infrastructures. We can do it. We should probably do it. We need to be able to do the transitions that our society is facing, specifically from a point of view of climate, and they will require such things, but we cannot do them by ourselves and top down. So we need to seduce and we need to communicate and make complex technical issues and financial issues understandable for broad swaths of society. So to inspire people to do this in a co-creative way is of huge importance. So when I did to you the presentation about the 5 steps, the point is actually that we have a puzzle, or almost a handbook, through which you can engage tens, yes, hundreds, yes, in fact, thousands of people to do this in a relatively egalitarian way together, like we solve other problems in Flanders recently, and but also make money in the process and make our economy better off at the end of the day. Here are sample designs of islands, and this is, to me, a perfect example. You know, here you have marine aquaculture, mussel farming at a large scale. Here you have a hydrogen storage, and the whole thing is built into what seems to be a natural structure, but it's in fact a sort of a hybrid artificial natural system that could be created in the North Sea, or maybe somewhere else in the world, if it's appropriate and needed. And then to engage people means to plan from the get-go with a broad community, with a broad group of people, to take your own society seriously, because if you don't, they will block it anyway at the end of the ride. Here you go. So the point is, if you want to build big infrastructures, don't start with one final image in sight. Start with a set of parameters and involve as many people as you can in the process, so it can generate money, it can be multifunctional, it can actually help with the big transitions that we face, and it will make us as a society move on to the next stage of our development. I want to thank you for your time.
Very inspiring presentation. Thank you very much. It was also an excellent introduction, and then we can now go back to the opening speech, as I'm honored to introduce our Minister President of Flanders. Please, the floor is yours.
So first the real speech and then the opening speech. It's a particular approach. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. It's a great pleasure for me to welcome you here at this deep dive session on artificial islands and sustainable blue growth at Expo Dubai. The 35th World Exhibition is very ambitious. Not only has it been a remarkable achievement to organize a global event of this scale and the magnitude in the current times, but Expo Dubai also strives to be an event that brings the world together to think about the challenges of today and the solutions of tomorrow. This deep dive session, organized by the Blue Cluster, fits perfectly into that framework. Flanders is an early adopter when it comes to blue economy. Not only do we have world-class maritime companies, the emerging blue company is also firmly built on a very large knowledge base. Flanders has a truly maritime identity. We are supporting the UN IOC considerably, for example, by hosting the International Ocean Data and Information Exchange Project Office. In Flanders, we have strong institutes dedicated to ocean science, such as the Flanders Marine Institute, and a cluster of maritime companies investing in innovative solutions for sustainable blue economy named the Blue Cluster. We believe that the Sustainable Development Goals can be reached by implementing new technologies. At the same time, we strongly believe that the blue economy is key for a sustainable economy as a whole. We are convinced that there are a lot of opportunities to be found at sea. To make this happen, we need to think ahead. This is exactly what we are here for today. I'm happy to be here at this deep dive session on oceans, which debates on how new maritime innovation can and should be implemented in the next decade. Today, discussions will focus on how artificial structures such as islands can boost specific areas of the blue economy, such as food and energy production. What I particularly like is that discussions will also look at opportunities for nature creation instead of only mapping threats. How can we create nature while developing artificial structures is an important question that will be tackled. Ladies and gentlemen, unfortunately, my schedule is rather tight. I cannot attend the entire session, but allow me to wish you a very successful and a very fruitful and interesting blue session. I thank you all.
I'm delighted to have a Mr. President that really is a believer in the blue economy, so thank you for that. You mentioned also nature development, and that's exactly the next topic we will have. Therefore, we have Professor Haward with us. He is from Tasmania, so he couldn't come over for his speech today, but if everything goes well, he is online and he will appear on the screen. Professor Haward at the University of Tasmania. Okay, there he is.
Good afternoon, everybody. Hopefully you can hear me. I'm speaking from Tasmania, and in fact, it's great to follow the Minister President and the first topic. I'm a program leader in the Blue Economy Cooperative Research Centre, which is a newly established initiative funded by the Australian government with partnerships with 40 industry and research institutions from 10 countries for a 10-year research initiative to look at challenges in the blue economy related to sustainable seafood production and offshore renewables. The cover slide I've chosen deliberately because this is one of the challenges we have. This is a photo of a natural giant kelp reef in Tasmania that has now been degraded due to climate change and related events. And part of my examples will be on how we can use artificial structures to change the and to advance sort of the ecological side of things. But I first want to just come through some concepts about the blue economy and make the point that it is a contested concept, and in fact one that is in fact important to note from this Conservation International definition, that economic benefits that may not be marketed. We need to look at the non-market valuation ideas here in relation to ecosystem services and values. So, and the environmental and social considerations, both previous speakers already have mentioned these. These are both opportunities and challenges. And in terms of governance, and in terms of artificial structures and islands, we need to look at these areas. Now, clearly there are significant opportunities with ecological restoration and marine permaculture. My institute at the University of Tasmania has been leading initiatives in restoring this giant kelp on the east coast of Tasmania for a whole range of benefits. In a sense, the kelp is a really critical element of the natural ecosystem that supports and has supported for over 150 years productive fisheries that are in decline. And so the restoration, in a sense, can in fact provide a return to a more balanced ecosystem, and in a sense have some economic benefits, the sort of ideal of the blue economy. And so in a sense, this is a very, the bottom slide on the right shows very simple seedling trials for kelp. These kelp have been artificial structures have been tried in various ways. These are simple concrete blocks. The critical thing here is that the science behind this is in fact dealing with breeding heat-tolerant kelp, finding kelp variants from nature that are tolerant to increased water temperatures. The east coast of Tasmania, it's a small island off the larger island of Australia, is one of the global climate hotspots. And in a sense, significant increases in water temperature have been registered over the last 60 years. We have one of the time series for coastal water temperature in the world, actually, that show the concepts of this. The other element of this opportunity is to address some of the challenges with offshore aquaculture generally, but offshore aquaculture in particular, and that is to look at really integrated multi-trophic operations where seaweed or shellfish farming could go together with as indicated earlier presentations with finfish aquaculture, to address some of the challenges that we find with intensifying finfish aquaculture. It's the question, the challenges and opportunities are, in a sense, the two sides of the same coin in addressing this. So we need to think about the way in which we can address the benefits, in a sense, through this. And we find that there are, looking at seaweeds and other activities in relation to aquaculture, there's a whole range of benefits. I must comment that I am not a biophysical scientist, I'm a political scientist, so I am not an expert in wave attenuation or in a sense nutrient cycling or even carbon sequestration. My interest is, in fact, how these activities can be used, in a sense, or developed through restoring, in a sense, an enhancement of environments, and have benefits that actually include economic opportunities. There are, of course, challenges, and the first speaker made a point about the need to address social acceptability. So the governance challenges here, just because the science shows that there are potentials, is great and important, but in a sense it's only the first step in looking at new opportunities. And in a sense, this slide, the image there is in fact from the United States. We see these areas, these challenges to offshore developments, as has been stated earlier. The governance challenges include the fact that some of the legal frameworks for offshore developments are not complete, in a sense, for these emerging uses. In a sense, we find in Australia that there are, while there are overarching frameworks for our exclusive economic zone, there are substantial challenges and gaps for new uses, and particularly managing integrated activities, energy production, renewable energy production, integrated, say, aquaculture operations. Which piece of legislation comes first? That sort of management challenge is important to recognise before we get too caught up in planning things without recognising that we actually have some both overlaps and challenges, or more importantly, gaps in our legal frameworks. We also need to recognise, as was shown in Alexander's presentation, the challenges of managing competing uses. And clearly, that will be an important issue to develop. Marine spatial planning helps us, and we in Australia can learn a lot from European experience. Equally, we're pretty good at managing marine protected areas, but sort of marine spatial planning, which involves multiple uses, are sometimes more challenging for us. The critical point that the President made about risks and risk assessments, we must recognise that there are challenges here. In a way, what I've been promoting in this, in terms of my discussion, is in fact ecological manipulation for positive benefits, but it's manipulation of the environment. And in a sense, under some of our environmental laws in Australia, that is prohibited. So it's actually a challenge to actually recognise what are the risks and making sure that we actually understand the impacts and the potential challenges here. The clearly most significant challenge for governance of this ecological restoration is the question of social licence and social acceptability. In a way, I'd argue that activities and processes that demonstrate positive ecosystem attributes are more likely to lead to social acceptance for offshore developments at various scales, from small reefs, either fixed or floating, to larger structures, or even the really interesting challenge that we're all facing around the world of transitioning old structures, offshore structures, to new uses. And in a sense, how do these challenges, these governance challenges, underpin eventually the potential success of what is a scientifically the science, to actually implement them into practical solutions for ecological and economic benefit. And of course, the last thing that I want to finish up with, one of the great risks that comes from this concern about the community concern about this is a variant of a particular objection to environmental from environmental organisations, and that's blue washing. Is the blue economy or blue growth, these positions that I'm taking, are simply dismissed as blue washing? Companies will say this. We don't trust them. Look at what they've done in the past. Look what's happened to our environment. We need to be really have the information and take these questions on board and seriously challenge them. Challenge the critics and be able to advance a reasoned case. And in the end of the day, hopefully the benefits will be there. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Professor Haward. I think you talked us through very nice opportunities, but you also highlighted challenges, risks. I think the term blue washing, we should keep it in mind maybe for the panel discussion in half an hour. And then we have a next expert, an expert in global energy, sustainable agenda, sustainable development goals, also head of the island laboratory. I can introduce you Professor Catalina Spataru, who is based also in UK, University College London, and was not allowed to travel from outside UK, so also she will join us virtually. Professor Spataru, the floor is yours.
Hello everyone, it's great to be here, part of this session to discuss complexity and opportunities of artificial islands. I will be talking about the concept of a blue-green artificial islands, as the ocean space could bring new opportunities for providing flexible, reliable sources of energy for those areas prone to sea level rise, as well as filling the gaps of scarcity of space on land by harvesting renewable energy and growing food. However, technical solutions are yet to be provided, so I will discuss some of these and the challenges. But before to go into this, let me briefly introduce the Islands Research Laboratory at UCL. We have a cumulative experience on insular area research of 115 person-years. We develop in-house models and tools based on artificial intelligence, machine learning, and system dynamics. And among them, we develop energy system modeling for techno-economic assessment of renewables integration and low-carbon technologies to assess the optimal combination of electricity generation, storage, control, transport, electrification, waste to energy, and interconnections. We also develop software platforms for analyzing solutions that leverage data interoperability for both simulated and real-world scenarios by allowing players to forecast efficiency and to evaluating competing solutions for implementation in line with the circular economy principles. We engage with a wide range of stakeholders, particularly from small islands developing states, to help us validate our research and models we develop. And we run several cases and research in this area. There are several challenges there, and as climate action goes hand in hand with the effort towards resource efficiency and sustainability transformation, the resource nexus concept provides an understanding of the interconnections between the different resources. For example, from the requirement of one resource as an input to produce another, or from substitutability of two or more resources. And as such, here is an illustrative resource dependency by considering the circular economy principles, by addressing the interlinkages between two or more natural resources used as an input in the socio-economic systems. Some of these interlinkages may be more obvious than others. For example, the cross-resource effects on use and availability. Others become more critical through changes. So, but what we have seen is actions that taken by firms, communities, governments, and so on are affecting one resources often have consequences for other resources in the same local or the other side of the world. So really acknowledging the resource nexus provides a more integrated view, allows us also to better understand the resource-related questions that will be difficult to answer in the traditional stovepiped research approach. So a key point here is that understanding resource use across spatial and temporal scales raises the issue of long-term compatible action in the short run. And this is crucial when it comes to resource use schedule, implementation and coordination between the Sustainable Development Goals, climate change agenda, the Sendai framework, and when we address the environmental intergenerational equity issues. So in line with this, the blue-green artificial islands power hub concept comes from the motivation that this type of hubs could act as power hubs to serve various communities and countries, contributing to a number of sustainability goals. So, for example, SDG 7, by providing access to affordable, reliable, and sustainably modern energy for all, or SDG 17 by facilitating the partnerships across different sectors, or SDG 13 by providing the mechanisms for effective climate change-related planning and management. So the hub concept requires a standardized floating solution for offshore space with application focusing on energy hub, living maritime transport, which requires careful planning to ensure preservation of marine habitats, but it also requires governance via international common laws, engagement from stakeholders, and financial cooperation. So what we explore is we explore the behavior of the multi-body interaction of a large number of floaters together, starting with a combined energy and transport hub with multiple use of resources and technologies. And this resulted in the concept of blue-green artificial islands, and the aim was really to achieve the opportunities for harvesting renewable energy, improve energy security by acting and reacting to disaster response while enhancing symbiosis with other marine sectors. For example, furthermore, we can look at the aquaculture, which plays an ever-increasing role in both food and energy production. Then energy can be harvested as bioenergy from crops grown offshore, while these crops can also add to the food production. However, all needs careful assessment, and not handling right could increase negative effects on the environment. So the concept was translated in a toolbox designed to support the techno-economic assessment of combined solutions. And the motivation comes also from the analysis of the previous disasters and their impact on islands and coastal areas, on electricity facilities and connections, on the understanding how they classify loads, how to restore power. For certain locations, we've seen that power quality, grid stability, reliability, and load shedding issues prove to be very challenging. And to ensure the power quality without increased cost, it's really an art on itself. So we do optimization of lifetime operation, maintenance, and energy production of different configurations and installation by means of supporting technological processes and decision-making models combined with minimization of human interventions. We consider the existing floating engineering concepts from offshore floating PV, floating wind farms, to create artificial islands for power generation. So what we explore is how combining different technologies and resources will substantially reduce the grid load demand and maintain the power quality under various load sources, uncertainties, and the fault conditions. In other words, for example, electrical boats can become floating microgrids and virtual power plants. Ships to switch out their diesel engines for batteries and large motors, and fleets of electrical vessels to help stabilizing grid loads with their batteries, such as really like electrical vehicles, which is another way that the ship serves as a microgrid. So there are many similarities between these. So in the case of a wider grid not functioning, then we have this type of local microgrid which can help to restore power supply to its immediate neighborhood by temporarily broadening the regions of the microgrid to create a larger island region around the microgrid. And this could be through use of converting boats as floating microgrids, which could connect further to regional offshore wind and solar farms. But controlling and coordination of such a cluster of microgrids in case of a disaster response or an interruption of power because of a deficit in power production could be utilized as plug and play when the load demand is high and more electricity is needed. And here is to identify what are the optimal routes between neighbor islands or coastal areas and how they could act together in the most coordinated way. So the modular nature of the blue-green artificial island hub systems means it can be tailored to a wide variety of regional needs. So we can have this uniform replacement parts which can be easily be obtained and installed, and modularity overall should help keep costs lower than current standard industry equipment and so on. So as I mentioned, using electrical boats batteries could be also a solution to all of these challenges. It could also increase the overall stability of a power source while being environmentally friendly and less costly. So we further explore also the implementation of innovative circular business models by looking how to reduce material and waste management costs for these systems and their operation. And material costs are more relevant than energy altogether. They make really up for a business case. Then different technologies require different materials demands and waste streams. So really integration of circular economy into the design, operation, and the end-use management of the systems and technologies and infrastructure really play an important role also. However, it's vital that the green transition goes hand in hand with protection of nature and wildlife. And using the blue-green hubs requires new ways of operating and doing the business, which comes with challenges in the current management and government's arrangement, because we have still the issues of license and social acceptances. So we really need kind of governance via international common laws, engagement, and financial cooperation. And creating such blue-green artificial islands hubs could come as a cheaper option than connecting the wind zone to the mainland via offshore platforms, and could also provide flexibility due to modular nature, that it means it can be tailored to a variety of local needs. So, but of course, we need to look at the opportunities, but also challenges we have to address the ecological restoration and the marine permaculture, for example, by locating different activities and to see how all of this can be working together. So it's important to look at the green transition from the different perspectives and combining all these solutions together.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Spataru. Especially the idea of this blue-green island hubs. I think it's a very interesting idea that we can discuss maybe a little bit further. So stay with us for the panel discussion, and then we have the last expert before we go to the panel, which is about seafood production. It's someone that works for the North Sea farmers in the Netherlands. It's engineer Zinzi Reimert, please. Zinzi.
Yes, thank you for the introduction. And I'm really looking forward to discuss to you today the question, can offshore seaweed cultivation and artificial islands reinforce each other? But maybe first dive into the question, why seaweed? So seaweed has some benefits. The first one is that it has a lot of applications. So you know the Japanese kitchen, so we can eat seaweed, but we can also use it as a building material, as a biofuel, biostimulants, alginates, and it is, for example, in your toothpaste already. Next to that, for the cultivation of seaweed, we don't need land and we don't need fresh water. And those two elements we really lack in the world at the moment. An additional advantage of seaweed is that it makes the oceans healthier and cleaner. This is, I guess, one of the reasons why in Tasmania they also want to keep the kelp forest, as it stimulates the biodiversity in the ocean. And finally, we really foresee the cultivation of seaweed within the offshore wind farms. So there's no need for extra space in the ocean, and we really can combine different functions. So I'm part of North Sea Farmers. We are a non-profit organization founded in 2014. And I always say we are kind of hands-on sector organization with the mission to make positive climate impact with seaweed cultivation. We are a movement of about 100 organizations in the whole value chain of the seaweed cultivation. So you can think of the seaweed farmers, of course, but also entrepreneurs working with the seaweed, like the Dutch Weedburger, and governmental organizations, research institutes, but also all the offshore wind farm owners like Eneco, Van Oort, Vattenfall. And it's not only in the Netherlands, so we are based in the Netherlands, but we really work for the whole seaweed sector in Europe, and having also Belgian parties involved in our community. And as we started in 2014 already with really cultivating seaweed offshore, testing it in a real environment at our offshore test site, we really have a lot of experience with this as well in a European scale. So the potential of offshore seaweed cultivation. So I said already, we have a lot of reasons why to use seaweed, but why doing it offshore? Here you see a map of the North Sea with these colors. And all these colors are the current and the future offshore wind farms. And if you just look at the Dutch part of the North Sea, it's already 14,000 square kilometers of offshore wind farms. And this is really the potential for offshore seaweed cultivation as well. So if you would have a building block like this, with seaweed cultivation, but also other forms of multi-use, as explained in previous presentations, like floating solar, artificial reefs, mussel cultivation. You can imagine we have this building block all over the North Sea, having a great opportunity here. And I want to take you a bit, to show it a bit in a visual way as well, how this could look like. So here we see an offshore wind farm with seaweed farms in between, with also different types of vessels, like the seaweed cultivation vessel, but also the operation and maintenance of the wind farms, and just the fishing vessel as well. And I think in the future, this should all be combined into one area, as we are going to use the space offshore. But it's not just a future image. So on the right here, you see a picture of one of the current systems that we have at our offshore test site in the North Sea. So we are already really doing this. We started this transition, but the question is now how to make it bigger, having more impact. So there's really a scaling up potential. And as mentioned as well in the beginning, we really need to do this in a good way. So we really foresee building with nature rather than against it, with certain values, just not for nature only, but also, for example, for all the people that are working in this whole value chain, as well as ecological and societal parameters. So we really need to build these offshore seaweed farms, also, for example, with ecological anchors, making sure the whole biodiversity is the same or even increase it. And so this whole seaweed cultivation is a positive outlook for investors, for governments, for all the different partners, as I mentioned, in the whole value chain, but maybe also for artificial islands, and that's why we are here today. So let's talk about this question: can offshore seaweed cultivation and artificial islands really reinforce each other? So here you see a visualization of the seaweed value chain, and you see both activities on land as well as offshore. And this has a great opportunity for artificial islands, as it is kind of a combination of those two. And if we look at this combination, we can look at it both from the side of the benefits for the artificial island for seaweed cultivation, as well as the other way around. But first start with the artificial island. So if we have all this seaweed offshore, we have tons of volumes that need to be processed. Currently, this processing is done onshore, on land. But you can imagine we are now shipping lots of volumes of seaweed to shore. And if it's possible to do this closer by, really close to the seaweed farm, it's way more sustainable. As well, if we process the seaweed, we have less volume that we need to transfer to land. And in addition, it can also be more fresh as it's closer by, so the time to be able to process it is just much shorter. Another added value for an artificial island nearby can be the combination of operation and maintenance. So as you saw in the different presentations, there will be lots of different applications on this artificial island, and they all need operation and maintenance, as well as the seaweed farms do. So it's really beneficial if we can combine these functions instead of doing it all on our own, as well as having the people working in this operation and maintenance, not sleeping on the vessels, but making use of the artificial island as well. And another opportunity could be the shape of the artificial island. Here you see an example of where you are currently in Dubai. So the shape of this island could really provide a shelter for seaweed cultivation. At the moment, we are really focusing on the North Sea, and it's a rough sea with all these wave conditions, and we have to design for it. But if we would have an artificial island with a certain shape that provides shelter, the design will be easier for these conditions, as well as the time frame to do the operation and maintenance, as the sea is just much less rough. But looking at the other side, so can seaweed cultivation have a benefit for the artificial island? Well, I actually named already 2 examples of them. So seaweed is really a sustainable resource. So if you would have this seaweed cultivation close by the artificial island, you can make use of it by just eating it, for example. But also other ways of using the seaweed at the island can be really beneficial. And another example, as also mentioned, is that it really helps to make the ocean cleaner and healthier. So by making the seaweed cultivation farms close to your island, you can really increase the biodiversity and the environment of the sea, having more species there, and having it just a cleaner ocean combined. But of course, there are some challenges as well. So seaweed is a seasonal product. So looking at, for example, the type of seaweed we're now using in the Netherlands, we seed it in October, November, and we harvest it around May. So if we would scale this up, we have really a large volume of seaweed that needs to be processed at the same time. So if we would like to transport this processing to the artificial island, really need to make use of this seasonal peak. So it can be a challenge. On the other hand, there are certain types of species of seaweed as well. So maybe, you can combine it in such a way that you have a continuous flow of processing. Another one can be the location of the artificial island. So if you looked at this map of the North Sea, it's a huge space. And if we would have an artificial island that is further away than the shore is, why would you go to the artificial island for the combination of functions. So it can really be an opportunity, but we have to look where to place such an island to make it beneficial for seaweed cultivation. And another one of the challenges could be the scale. So if we have this large amount of seaweed cultivations and seaweed farms, and maybe we need a large amount of artificial islands as well. Or will it be one really big artificial island, almost like a new piece of land? Or do we need all these small islands that are maybe floating in between the seaweed farms? So there's a lot to think about and a lot of opportunities as well. And to wrap up, I think we have a lot of opportunities and a lot of challenges on the other hand. But it's definitely worth to keep an eye on this combination of artificial islands and seaweed cultivation. So thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Dr. Reimert. Please stay with us. You've put a lot of questions on the table, which is nice to start the panel with. So now I would like to invite the panelists, and first of all, I want to present the special envoy of the United Nations, Mr. Peter Thomson, who will have also the concluding remarks after the panel, but is also so kind to join us in the panel. Please, Mr. Thomson, you can take place over there, and then I invite also Professor Dogo to the panel. I hope the other panelists are still there from a distance and can join us on the screen. And before we start, I would like to invite you here in the room to think of questions if you have some. We will be open to take the questions, and you can address directly one of the panelists. So I think that's a nice opportunity to have this direct interaction, but also the people at home, you can use the chat function to ask the questions, and we will take care of them. So we have about half an hour to discuss a little technical issue. Maybe to start with, what I would like to do is actually, I heard a lot of opportunities, but also challenges. Actually, do we need these islands? This is the basic question of this session. It might be interesting, but we are not sure. So my question would be to the panelists to start this discussion. Is it for the sustainable development at sea and the blue economy, is it a must-have according to you, or is it a nice-to-have? I don't know who wants to take first.
I'll hit it off.
I'll jump in if you like.
Oh.
No.
Is that? Let's sort of take the military equation out of things to start with, because as we all know, most militaries would love to have artificial islands placed all over the place. So let's take that out of it. Let's also take out the idea of expanding your national sovereignty, because under the law of the sea, artificial islands don't count as your perimeters for your EEZs. So take those two out of your mind for purposes of discussion. Alexander said something which I thought was really important, fluidity. If you're talking about any structures in the sea, you've got to think about the power of nature. I was lucky enough to sit with the president of Malawi at lunch today, and I told him a little story about this island that I used to go to as a kid. I come from Suva in Fiji, and Suva is ringed by a mighty coral reef. And out on the reef there are two islets, which have structures on them. And when I was a kid, you could hire one of these islands as a sort of holiday island, and a bunch of families would get together and you'd hire it. It used to be the old quarantine station in the sailing days for yellow fever and things like that. So there was some barracks, there was a big central water tank. So all the rainwater off the roofs went into this central water tank. And there was a lighthouse, because there was a passage there. And the lighthouse was right on the beach. And we as kids, you go up and pat the lighthouse. It was right on the beach. And then in the 50s, there was a big earthquake in Suva. I remember the tsunami and seeing it. It's one of my early childhood memories. And the photographers who went out on the main reef after that earthquake have the photographs of a gap, as wide as from that chair to the wall over there of this thing about 10 miles long, just a huge opening up of the earth, which the ocean poured into, which created the tsunami. So I'm getting to the point about artificial islands, because that island that we used to go to for our holidays, over the next 20 years, moved about half a mile along the reef, because the currents changed because of what the earthquake did. And one by one, every year we went out there, it was a bit tragic. You know, there'd be one less coconut tree, one less building. It was all falling off that end of the island, and this end of the island was like a virginal sand protuberance going out. It was like a snail moving across the reef, until eventually all of the old island was gone, and the new island kept on going and perpetuating itself with coconut trees and with all the various types of life that are on those coral islands, just moving across the reef. It's now pretty much stable where it is. It's got huge trees on it now. You go out there in your boat and sit on the beach and think about the old days. And you knew about the old days because if you looked half a mile that way, you could still see the rubble of the old concrete water tank and the lighthouse standing adamant way out there on itself by the reef. So fluidity, this is absolutely essential when you're talking about messing with nature. And I'm very aware that in this room, there are probably people that are involved in the islands right here off the artificial islands off the coast of Dubai here, which are some of the most spectacular in the world, of course, and probably being Belgians, you had companies involved in their construction. So I'm having to be careful what I say here about artificial islands. But I did notice in the photographs that somebody was showing there that, I was looking at the sand flows and the way the foreshore structures were changing as a result. And I'd be very interested to learn about that while we're here in this discussion, because I have some skin in the game. I was involved in a similar project, not quite on that scale, but 6 big international hotels exist on it, of creating not so much an artificial island, but demolishing a beautiful mangrove island and building a golf course and 6 hotels on it. And I can tell you that I have some disturbed sleep over that. I know what we did for the foreign exchange of Fiji, huge boost. I know what we did for employment for the tourist industry of Fiji, thousands of badly needed jobs, but also know what happened to the mangroves. It was gone. I know what happened to the foreshore, the seagrass meadows and so on. And the beaches are largely gone as well because of all the various groins. So when you muck with Mother Nature, you've got to be careful what you're doing. And when I was looking at some of these presentations, I was wondering, why artificial islands? Because you could, I love this idea of combining seaweed production with wind farms. I've been talking about that for years. And I think it's really logical, and lots of other multi-use of the space out there. But in that photograph, you saw a platform, an existing oil platform, which presumably is going to go out of use because oil and gas has no future. So why build an island when you've already got a structure there? You see what I'm getting at? Anyway, I'm doing the closing remarks. As you can see, I'm passionately interested in the subject, so I'm really interested to learn what others have got to say.
Thank you. Thank you also for the interesting stories. Can we go to the other panelists? Maybe, I don't know, who wants to take the word? Professor Spataru?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, many interesting points was raised now, and I personally believe we should use the extinct floating engineering structures and try to refurbish them into these artificial islands, and to create additional power generation, and through use also of electrical boats, of floating microgrids and virtual power plants. We have an entire, we have the ships now, an entire industry which can switch out their diesel engines for batteries and large motors and fleets of electrical vessels. Those could really help stabilizing grid loads with their batteries and could play the type of floating structure which could be connected with offshore wind or solar. So we can use this type of flexible floating structures to serve as a microgrids. And then there are many synergies between the land and the ocean. But you raise really important discussions in terms of what should we do. And the problem is, in this moment, is about we don't really have a great understanding at the global level of ocean facilities, of offshore wind, tide, and wave farms, for example. So we need this kind of global inventory. Regulated industry also, we need the regulated industry operating at sea, at national, global level. We need strict set of guidelines controlling the amount of pollution and operation which can produce. Maybe also to introduce taxes for those that exceed their allotted amount of emissions and discharges, for example, of nitrogen or phosphorus and so on. Regulations also specifically needs to be tailored to the type of floating installations. So developers also needs to consider environmental laws and water regulations. So it's a really complex problem, and of course one of the biggest potential setbacks of all this project is the cost of putting it into action. It's not only about the investment and initial cost, but also about the cost of funding regulations to be put in place, a diverse industrial operating at sea and so on. So we could create all these scenarios and we could look at different combinations and so on, but it's the topic is much more than that.
Okay, so
I would say
it's definitely a nice to have, but it's not sure if it's a must have. I can see that Professor Haward is very keen on joining the discussion. Professor Haward, please.
Right. Yeah, I think Ambassador Thomson's made a really important point about the language here. If the blue growth and blue economy are contested concepts, I think artificial islands are in fact contested. I think what we're talking about are a range of structures, a range of activities, and we're particularly in the Blue Economy CRC developing a project to look at floating artificial reefs with ecologically sensitive concrete, for example, that actually there's no point in actually trying to save nature by making more problems with other things, which I think the chair has pointed out. So I think that when we're talking about artificial islands, I think we are talking about quite a range of things, from relatively small moorings, if you like, and anchors to relatively large structures. I'm very much more on the small scales, floating, anchoring, various other things than large. I think we would have a great deal of trouble around the world arguing for very large artificial islands in the sense of those, because it doesn't make sense to me. It makes sense to look at ways that we can, as we've shown, as the presentations other presenters have shown, existing things around. We've got spaces, we've got structures. I mean, I was in a meeting a few weeks ago where discussion about biofouling on structures was raised. It's a problem for engineers, but for ecologists, it's great. So, as long as you're not introducing nasty critters into the space. So, my view of yes, at appropriate scale, Marijn, if that's okay.
Okay, I think that's a very important remark, that we have to think about scale. Do we want this huge scale islands or not? Maybe I can turn to Professor Droge. Do you want to add on that? Please try to be brief, that you can have some questions also from the room.
Yes, I'll be very brief, but I think for the case of the North Sea, specifically the European North Sea, as Zinzi showed it in her slide with all the, the fields and a lot of the activity that's happening there, when it comes to big islands, the bigger structures, the only way we will reasonably be able to get public acceptance for such a venture would be if it is really and truly part of a blue transition, let's say of the energy transition. So we're leaving fossil, we're going to renewable, we're having a huge amount of energy infrastructure in the North Sea. And occasionally, whether it be for battery purposes, for storage purposes, or for DC-AC transformation or others, there will be the need for, a piece of land. So I think in that framework, when our entire, when the entire continent needs to shift for the survival of the planet, then you can justify. I mean, but I think in that case, it is also effectively justified. And that's why I think it's so important to also start working collaboratively on these solutions, because we know we will need them, let's say, for survival. But of course, not as a mere real estate operation in its own right. It has to do with major missions having to do with, let's say, survival and energy.
I think that's a very interesting point. We have to think why we need it, that it is justified. And then we have Dr. Reimert. Do you want to add on this?
Yeah, to shortly add on that, I think indeed survival is one of the keys. So in general, we say if you can do it onshore, do it onshore, because offshore work is really a challenge. And you don't need to just go offshore because there's space. We need to do it because it's an opportunity to save the planet. Let's say it like that. So if we're going offshore, if we're going to build these kind of islands, let's use the opportunity to improve the world, improve the nature restoration, make it a sustainable island, make sure we have the blue energy and not the gray one. So we really need to do it in such a way, and then it's of course really nice to have, as it will improve our world as a whole.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm sure there's a few questions that we can take from the room. Is there anybody that want to address one of the speakers, one of the panelists, for a specific question? There must be. Yes. There's a mic also for the people at home. They can follow easier.
I'm quite loud, so it should be all right.
Yeah. It's for the people at home.
For those at home.
First of all, I must congratulate. It's a new subject, definitely for me. I enjoyed the presentations. And maybe, therefore, what I'm asking is it's based on what I heard just now. It makes sense to some extent, but we also have to be careful in terms of the total carbon footprint, what it amounts to in terms of creating that kind of island. And is there a room to test what technologies, like comment was made that in terms of nutritional security and to give livelihood options to the coastal communities, seaweeds will be a very good option. But then why can't we simply go for softer options, and that is that you raise it in the existing sea or make raiseway ponds along the sea and test how much is the market, how much one can process seaweeds, and whether it really adds to the rural communities' livelihood options as well as nutritional security. Quite a bit of work has already been done. In fact, in India, there is one company that IFCO. So from the seaweeds, they are making sagarika. It's a nutritional fertilizer. So that kind of thing, so one can perhaps scale it up in other countries as well. But let's look into the overall life cycle analysis, what we intend to do, what is the carbon footprint, rather than saying that energy can be generated over there, but at what cost? What is the initial cost? And my question is largely coming like the kind of debate we are facing for electric vehicles, and a very recent report said that the carbon footprint of producing an electric vehicle is perhaps equivalent to the petrol that any automobile otherwise consumes. So we should not be perhaps getting into that kind of technologies. So that analysis, if it's positive, one should go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this very interesting question. Is anybody from the panelists wants to react on that? So it refers to life cycle analyses. How much energy would it cost to have these structures? Is there anybody of you that wants to react on that?
I can react on that.
Yes, go ahead.
I think it's a really important, thanks. It's a really important question you're raising there. I think it's one of the keys. So we only have to do these kind of innovations or new steps if it's in the right way. And of course, there's a difference between a starting phase, a pilot phase, and a future phase. So we really need to be able to test, to check what you are also saying, like let's see how it develops. Let's see if there's a market. Let's see if it works. This testing phase is really important, and we also really have to check this like all the time if it's still going the right way. And you can imagine in a testing phase, building something, it takes more than you get out of it. But we have to look to the future if it's still worth it to continue. And if at the end it makes, the balance is like the positive way instead of the other way around. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, I would just like to add, I agree, and thank you for your point also. I think it's an absolutely relevant and super important point. Certainly, as far as I know, there has been no full life cycle analysis for this kind of object. That would be direly needed. What I know is that when it comes to shipping, because the big producer or consumer of energy in producing this will be ships, the first hydrogen-powered ships are, let's say, rolling off the dock as we speak. So that's very promising. If they can be green hydrogen-powered, then there is actually a credible avenue to do this with very low CO2 footprint. For electrical cars, I hear you. This is really off topic in this debate, but last study that I read that came out gave over the full life cycle for an electric vehicle 25%, and it was a super integrated one in terms of analysis, differentiated for different continents, but it was between 23 and 28% of carbon, let's say, footprint over the life. But who knows until the next study, right? No.
Thank you very much. I think we have a few minutes more. So if there is more questions, I see two questions. Maybe we can take them. If the panelists can answer in a short way, we should be able to take them. Yes, in the back.
I'd like to ask what the panelists think are the most effective ways to engage the multiple communities and to get the buy-in we need from society for a lot of these activities. It's really interesting to see that everybody's talked about the risks and the need for cooperation from many different sectors. It's not just an engineering problem, it's a social problem. So how do we effectively tackle those social and interdisciplinary connections?
I think Professor Doel.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I'll give it one pass. I think the key is to really work with the communities that are nearby, that are the nearest, no matter how far that is, and that will be the most affected by the project. Because the project, if let's say it is basically a green-blue energy project with all sorts of other multifunctional uses attached to it. In such a scenario, there are large benefits for large groups in society, but still your view might be spoiled, or your wave action might be diminished. I mean, there might be effects on the local economy. That needs to be completely transparently discussed with these stakeholders. And then I think the only way you do this is by finding benefits, collateral benefits. So, for instance, an energy community locally where people that live close have, I don't know, better rates, or where where farming, basically an island is nothing but a set of parcels. So some parcels could be for the local community. And so there are ways in which you can create buy-in by just making them literally profit from the overall project. And then you have to make sure that this is spread with benefits for the diverse participants in that community, and not just to one specific subgroup. Okay. But I think this is possible.
Thank you. Mr. Thomson, you wanted to react on? Okay. There was another question in the back. Yes, there.
In this discussion, you give food and energy solutions. I thought in the first days of investigating this blue economy, there was also a third part, coastal protection due to the rise of the oceans. Has that been skipped? Is that gone away, that advantage or that possible solution?
No, not at all. Maybe I can take that because we organized the session. We had to choose only like 3 main uses, but of course there's many more. And coastal protection, especially if you just in front of the coast, is certainly one of the benefits you can have from island construction. Thank you for the question.
I'd also like to respond to the question in my closing remarks.
Okay, so. Like in a minute. Are there any questions from home, from the people following online? Okay. They're all falling asleep on a Sunday afternoon. You wanted to add on this? No. Okay. Then I want to thank you all for participating during the panel, also the panelists. Don't run away, because we have still the concluding remarks of Mr. Thomson, please.
If you do want to run away, now's the time. I was at the TED Summit in Edinburgh last week, and the CEO of Shell, very brave man, because the room was all against him, got up to explain his corporate position, his personal position as well as a father. And he was very explicit on the fact that oil and gas industry has no future. This is the CEO of Shell. The Shell recognizes that oil and gas is a dying industry. And that's why they're investing in renewables. That's why they've invested without any customers in a $1 billion green hydrogen facility that's under construction now. Oil and gas will still be there, obviously, but it'll make no sense to use it because renewables will be so cheap and so clean for us all. So I make that point because a lot of people still think this is some kind of conspiracy. If Donald Trump is your chosen leader, you probably think that way. But as a grandfather of four grandchildren, I would love it all to be a conspiracy and it all to be not true. But it just patently is the truth. Why do I know that? Because our very best Earth scientists are put into this IPCC panel, voluntary work, and panel after panel after panel, whether it's IPCC or OPS, comes up with the same conclusions about where we're going on our current track, thanks to anthropogenic activities, mainly due to oil burning of fossil fuels. The World Meteorological Organization, is this some sort of, conspiracy? No, it's our weather people from your country, from my country, from all around the world. The weather people put this information together in Geneva, collate it, and work out where we're going in the world. Weather people. I don't think they're trying to subvert us somehow. There's no lies going on here, folks. We are heading on our current path to a world which is over 3 degrees global warming before the end of this century. That's in the lifetime of my beloved granddaughter, the youngest one. That's a world on fire. And as I said in my earlier speech today, I just refuse that future and will use every minute to fight against it. So we've been at war with nature. And in that context, you have to consider that destroying mangroves, destroying seagrass, sea meadows, destroying kelp is akin to destroying Amazonian rainforests. And you know what? It's 4 times more damaging to our planet than the Amazonian rainforest destruction on an acreage basis. Why? Because it sequesters 4 times more carbon than that Amazonian rainforest, than the terrestrial cousins, trees, shrubs, and so on. That's why they're so important to us, these marine vegetable-based life forms like kelp and mangroves and seagrass, and of course the wetlands of our coastlands. So, as we know, we've got to stop this war against nature. The Secretary General of the United Nations has called for an end to it, for example. And as I said before, I'm not preaching to anybody. I'm as guilty as anybody. I've been involved in dredging. It's every bit as destructive as bottom trawling to the marine environment. Second point I'd like to make is that development is not necessarily unfriendly to the ecosystem. I was in Xiamen in China, about 2 years ago now, I suppose. And I went to the Xiamen is actually on an island, and there's a massive harbor behind it, and then there's the mainland of China. And that used to be a big kind of industrial oyster area that in between the island and the mainland. And it was a mess. I saw photos of what it looked like, and it was environmentally just awful. It was just all gone to hell. What they decided to do was to restore the mangrove forest. Massive thing, massive. The size of my hometown was being replanted in mangroves. And they were being smart about it, thinking, okay, we can make this a tourist attraction, because there's going to be a lot of bird life coming in here. So they were building in walkways, even as the mangroves are little saplings, they were building these walkways in and so on. The unlooked for added value for all this was that when you look out at this, one of those massive Chinese cities with all the high-rises, everything on the mainland which was facing that restoration project, the real estate values had tripled. Everybody wanted to buy property that was going to be looking out on this great green expanse. So, when I was thinking about artificial islands at about 3 a.m. this morning, I was thinking, some of the stuff we heard today about there can be added value to the idea of getting an island out there that is serving as a hub for, I don't know, seagrass farming or mangrove restoration or whatever. Maybe you need somewhere to base that on. Maybe you need an artificial island. But I'd again reinforce Alexander's point about just beware of the forces of Mother Nature, beware of the fluidity of what happens to an artificial island once you put it out there. I think the other thing I'd really like to make as a point is that we do have only the one ocean. You will hear people talk in the plural. You'll hear people talk in the possessive. That I find just the funniest one of all. The idea that humanity owns the ocean. No, it's the other way, folks. we came from the ocean and we'll be long gone when the ocean's still there. So I think we just have to get rid of the possessive idea and live within it rather than think it's somehow our property to muck with. And I also want to emphasize the singular because it's one bathtub, and this has great importance. That's actually the first principle of ocean literacy, by the way, that there's one ocean with many features. Why is this important? Think of it as a bathtub. It's bobbing up and down all over the place with lots of things in it, but when you put in more water into that bathtub at one end, it's going to affect the level down at the other end of the bathtub. So those Greenland ice sheets pouring water in are going to affect back in Tuvalu and my neighbor in the South Pacific, their sea level rise. And that's where you get this other aspect that I think you are referring to. Is there a role for artificial islands when you look at sea level rise? Think of being the prime minister of Tuvalu or an atoll republic somewhere. What are you going to do with your people? You've got thousands of years of culture on this group of atolls that you look after. Are you all just going to migrate to some city, suburb, and metropolitan area somewhere? And, your culture is obviously going to dissipate. Or are you going to try and stay where you are and adapt your physical presence, which presumably would be trying to build up on top of the islands. If you're on a volcanic structure, which is what most of these atolls are, right? They're not alluvial structures like some of the big cities of the world, which are real trouble. They're actually on volcanoes with coral sitting on top of them. So you presumably could dig down into those structures, down into bedrock, and start building your island up. So that's maybe a way of us to consider artificial islands. Rising sea levels are a reality. And it's not just islands, it's all the coastal areas of the world, some worse than others. As you know, the west coast of the United States, not too bad. East coast, big problems. So that really is my third point. And I have a fourth point, which is that, as you heard me say this morning, sustainable blue economy is our future. Only if you talk about the sustainable blue economy. If you talk about blue economy and you're thinking in your mind about just one more round of linear exploitation of finite planetary resources, I'm sorry, but those days are gone, and that's end of human species if you're thinking in those linear terms. But everybody's starting to think circular now. Everybody's starting to think recycling, and all our systems have to be that for the future. So the same with the sustainable blue economy. We can't be going into new ways of ripping all the fish out of the ocean. That's just, if that's what technology is aimed at doing, I'm sorry, it's just a crazy business. We're already 34% of the global fish stocks are overfished. So it's all about circularity now and resilience. That's the sustainable blue economy. It's about the greening of shipping. It's about carbon sequestration under the seabed. It's about sustainable aquaculture, new forms of food coming out of the ocean. And of course, the new medicines that we're going to need as well, not to mention all the energy things that we talked about this morning. All of this is circular. And I foresee massive financial flows, and I think you'll start seeing them in Glasgow in a couple of weeks' time, from things like the Green Climate Fund, Global Environmental Facility. I've had talks with them recently in Marseille. Money is going to start moving in a big way towards the sustainable blue economy. So what is the essential part of that process? The essential part is that we don't start a sort of mad gold rush into the sustainable blue economy. As you can imagine, all the mistakes that have been made. It has to be based on good plans. And good plans have to be based on good science, which is why the UN Decade of Ocean Science is so important. Now, the interesting thing is, and this is my concluding point, is that one of the really big developments that happened in the 4 years that I've been the Sustainable Envoy for the Special Envoy for the Ocean, is that there was this high-level panel for a sustainable ocean economy. It was set up by Prime Minister Solberg of Norway, and she invited 13 other heads of state, heads of government, very significant EEZ countries. You know, President of Indonesia sits on the panel, the Prime Minister of Canada, the Prime Minister of Australia, the President of Chile. You know, these are huge parts of the ocean within the EEZs of these countries. So these 14 heads of government, heads of state, I sit on the panel to represent the UN. They, in their wisdom, appointed about 250 experts from all around the world to write a series of blue papers on pretty much all the subjects you can imagine on the sustainable blue economy. And the big conclusion to come out of all that, the big conclusion, was this commitment by the 14 heads of state, heads of government, a commitment that 100% of their exclusive economic zones of their countries would be covered by sustainable ocean plans, which they would put in place by 2025. So that, in other words, this is work which is currently at hand, that is being done now. By 2025, it'll be done. And they have said to their peers, the other 180 countries of the world, or those that have got coastal zones, obviously, that they encourage them to have sustainable ocean plans in place for their EEZs by 2030, end of the SDGs. So you can envisage a world by 2030 in which all of the EEZs, and hopefully, because of the BBNJ conference, all of the high seas, is covered in sustainable ocean plans. And that's a really important point for me to end on, because I think you saw from the presentation from some of our panelists just how busy it's going to get out there and why we need to get these plans carefully in place. So folks, thanks very much. I hope I end on a sense of hope, because as I say, as a grandfather, that's my motivation for all my work. And I do feel hopeful, and I feel hopeful because of what the ocean can give us. I think we've done a pretty good job of mucking things up on land, but I think if the ocean, if we treat it right, it's going to treat us right. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Thomson, and thank all of you for your attention to come here to the Belgian Pavilion. I think we had a very fruitful discussion and a very good session. Thanks to you, thanks to the panelists. An applause for the panelists, and then you can go. Thank you very much.